Let's move to part 3 of this podcast, where we're talking about the quality of finance processes, quality of data, and controls. And we've spoken in part 1 about master data and how important that is, enforcing a reconciliation discipline. In part 3, we're going to talk about standardizing validation and approval workflows. That's the third part, to making sure that we've got controls in our data. Can either of you explain to me what that means?
In a nutshell, it's making sure that the right things are getting done on an ongoing basis. That ongoing basis could be a monthly, daily, weekly, yearly, if it's the budget maybe, that the right steps are happening within those processes, the right people are performing those tasks, and that they're being performed at the right time, and you're able to track where those different tasks are. And that kind of brings everything together. First of all, you've got standardized processes that are repeatable and happen in the same way every time the process runs. Yes, you will look at tweaking and enhancing and changing. But when people start their month-end process, for example, they know what needs to be done and they follow that every month. The workflow is essential because it helps you know who is doing what, where they are, and who's complete. So a workflow will ensure that, number one, the person who needs to complete a task is triggered or reminded about that task. They need to update that workflow as they're working on that task and once they complete it, which would then allow the next person in that process chain to then kick off their process. And from a management point of view, allows you to also monitor where that process is, who's complete, who isn't complete, and allows you to also then follow up if people are lagging in terms of that process. So in a nutshell, it brings standardization, but also helps you manage where you are in that process. And you're always pushing deadlines. You want to make sure that you're on top of what's happening and it works in a very repeatable, smooth manner, time after time.
Yeah. Raj, if I could also just then add on to what Anthony is saying, if I give also a practical example around, let's say, a procurement process. Typically an order comes in for a certain cost center, but when we're looking at standardizing and automating workflows, we're looking at, is that order an operational item or is it a capital item? And if it's a capital item, there's some extra master data field that needs to be completed. So and then routing that purchase order to the right limits of authority. Looking at cost center, it's Mr. X. If it's capital and it's this amount, then it needs to go to these 3 phases right till the MD. And that's a typical example of how, for example, in a procurement process, that you have these automated workflows in the background to make sure the company policy is adhered to and followed, so that we can place reliance on those numbers from a control and governance point of view. Yeah.
So ERP, I understand. I mean, you're not going to run an ERP without. Well, actually, some people do, but you don't want to be running it without workflows, right? But where can you use workflow in the non-ERP environment? Because a lot of people, if we're collecting data, we say, okay, well, there's the spreadsheet, just go and fill it out. Everybody log on and put your data in that spreadsheet. And many companies don't have workflow outside of ERP. So give me some examples of where you could use workflow outside of ERP.
For example, on the commercial side of things, typically your commercial teams are working off CRM systems like HubSpot, or maybe they're using Google Docs, or some other automated workflow technology like Zapier or Smartsheet. And on their website, there's an inquiry, or they want to they want to register for a product launch, and they want to attend the product launch. Essentially, they're having a front-end web page where you're typing some details, and automatically there's a workflow that's generated. It updates this customer database but at the same time sends an email depending on what product it is, which region it is. It'll email the respective sales rep and tells them, please contact Joe. He's interested in this. He wants a quote on that. So you see that even when you're making accommodation bookings, etc., that you do this inquiry and there's a workflow that kicks in the back. So that's like a commercial sort of example. But we can come up with quite a number of scenarios that will just helps that manual capturing or that manual documentation. If I bring it back to finance, for example, recurring journals. One can set up workflows for your recurring intercompany rental or intercompany management fee, or a recurring accrual to just go through automatically every month after it's been preset for the year. Start of a fiscal year, you set that workflow up and it runs automatically. So that's just eliminating certain routine and low complexity or low risk journal entries, and I cannot emphasize enough it being low risk and low complexity, because those are the journal entries and transactions you want to automate, not necessarily the converse that are high complexity and need some human review.
Yeah, so we often think of those journals as being efficient, but actually what you're saying there is it's bringing that quality.
Yes.
That journal happens on the same day every month, at the same amount. It's landing in the right cost center. It's doing the right thing. And that brings that quality. You don't have to worry about that one again.
Yes.
Once it's set up.
Yes.
There can be a situation where that workflow stops working. And you see that with automated systems. You automate it. You spoke about Zapier. Then suddenly your connection, your authentication doesn't happen anymore, and the workflow can't happen. Yep. Then what? What kind of? And Anthony, I know we've got a solution to that. We spoke about that last week, and maybe you can just explain those daily checks that we do inside our business, and why do we have that?
So, what the daily checks is that Roger is talking about? It's a series of checks that are done, in our case, by an individual, but that individual is checking the quality or that the correct items have gone through and that processes or workflows, automated workflows, have not failed. And that's quite important. So the person's not necessarily going in and doing what that automated workflow would do. They're purely coming and say, yes, that has triggered the way we expected. It's populated what we expected. And in that way, by doing those checks on a daily basis on your critical processes and workflows, you can make sure that if something does fail, it's triggered, and there can be a workflow that's kicked off to make sure that that's corrected and run through, and in subsequent days runs through correctly. So it's critical that you don't just assume that those processes are running in the background and forget about them. You want to make sure that you are validating that those automations are running on an ongoing basis to ensure that key business processes are not completely getting forgotten. So something like that, where you've got daily checks, either an individual doing daily checks, or if you've got more sophisticated systems, you could get the systems to do those daily checks and fire off emails or messages if something is triggered that doesn't balance up.
So just coming back to a point I made earlier, and this is a useful tip if ever there was one. I remember in the old days, we used to, if we had a spreadsheet and we were getting multiple people to populate that spreadsheet, we would literally set up the spreadsheet and tell everyone, okay, go to the shared drive, put in your data. Even if it was one person, they would capture all the data. A simple thing that you can do is put a form in front of that spreadsheet. So Microsoft has got a form, Google Sheets has got a form. We use Smartsheet, Monday.com, all of these systems. Always force the users through that form.
Yeah.
Why? Because you can put checks and balances on that form immediately. If it's meant to be an email, you say it has to be an email. If it's got to be text or a value, you can pick that stuff up. Now, I know Excel does have validation, so if you switch on validations, Excel, you can do that. But it's a lot easier for user when they're capturing maybe ideas or projects that they want to do, or action items, is to force them to go through that form. And that just cleans up everything. It makes sure that you get all the fields that you're looking for, and the ones that they have populated are in the right format. So that's something very straightforward that anybody can and should do. So if you're not doing that, ensure that you set that up on whenever you collect data, make sure it goes through a form.
Yeah, that's a good one, Raj.
It's often the simple and small things that can make a big difference, to the quality of your data, and that has a long-term impact. So it's not always a complicated solution. Something small you can implement, like a form, will make a really big difference.
And then not only is that form validating the data that goes in, but the moment that record lands, a workflow can kick in and get somebody to check it, put their part of the puzzle in. Now, Bob's finished. Now Mary needs to put the costing in. And when she's finished, somebody else has to put the cost center mapping in. And so you can workflow not just to get stuff done, not just because it's efficient and that you can track it and you've got visibility of where your process is, but the quality. It's the quality aspect that these workflows and approvals are ensuring. Now, these systems are basically free today. If you're on, say, something like the Microsoft stack, you've got Power Automate, and they give you a whole lot of templates that if this happens, then this next step kicks in, and you can have a series of processes. These are such simple things that make a difference to the quality of your data, which will make a difference to the quality of your controls, because if that's poor, your controls are going to be poor. And then finally, when you're reporting, people aren't looking and say, oh, that thing's in the wrong category, or, we need to move that thing up. Everything's in its right place, and you're building quality at the source.
Yeah.
Anything else we've missed here in terms of validation, standardizing validations with workflows?
So if I can just, bring in a point just to kind of wrap everything up. We've spoken about three things in this podcast. The one is, your master data and keeping that controls of your master data. We've spoken about reconciliations, and we've spoken about automation. And just to kind of bring it all together there, Donovan spoke about when we were discussing the chart of accounts. He spoke about a document and completing a document when a new account needs to be added, and having that sign off. Now, your automation and your workflow automation should and can manage that whole process for you, where it's requested, it kicks off a workflow, which passes it to the next person for approval, et cetera, until it gets implemented into your ERP. And, so everything kind of comes together there. If you think about it from a workflow point of view and an automation point of view, you can manage that whole business cycle and ensure that your standards are in place, that your chart of accounts are, your master data is correct, et cetera. So it's such a key part of kind of bringing that all together, using the systems that you've got available to you for that workflow.
Thanks, Donovan. Your last comments on this episode?
Yeah, and I think we've encouraged teams out there to look into what the art of the possible is in automating the workflows. But when done, or when doing so rather, two important things is your processes documented completely right now for you to then identify the ones that can be automated or even eliminated for that matter. And the key thing when deciding that is routine and low complexity and low risk, because you still want that human oversight. That's me.
Thanks, gentlemen. Thanks for that conversation. So that was part 3 of our internal process, improving quality of data and controls. We spoke about standardized validations and approval workflows. So if you haven't heard all 3 parts of the series, please go back. The first part was strengthen master data governance. In the second part, we spoke about enforcing reconciliation discipline. And then in this part, we spoke about standardized validation and approval workflows. So thank you for joining us on the FP&Ai Podcast. Please remember to subscribe, to ring the bell, and to just share these episodes and give us feedback in the comments. We'd love to hear your comments, and we will build that into future episodes. But that's it for 2025. Thanks to my co-hosts, Anthony Wilson and Donovan Moses, for your contributions to this podcast. I hope you guys have a great break and come back well rested with lots to say on the next podcast.
Thanks, Raj. Cheers.
Thanks, Raj. Thanks, Donovan. Cheers, everyone.